Introducing a lineup of international award-winning and talented indie authors, only on the Writers' Corner live show. Get ready to be inspired by Elizabeth Ann Lawless. She's a prolific author with a passion for multicultural Western history, publishing, and creativity. Her latest children's books focus on the stories of African American cowboys. You're watching the Writers' Corner live show. Don't go away, we'll be right back. Welcome to the Writers' Corner live show, the weekly water cooler for authors and readers. Join us for 30 minutes of insightful conversation with some of the biggest names in the industry. We feature award-winning authors, New York Times and USA Today bestsellers, and even international indie sensations. Tune in and join our family-friendly community only on the Writers' Corner live show. If you're just joining us, welcome to the Writers' Corner live show. If you're not following us yet, please do so. Then you'll get notified next time we go live. I'm Brigitte Limbanda from Cape Town in South Africa. And in today's show, we're going to be talking to Elizabeth Lawless. If it's your first time watching the Writers' Corner live show, feel free to let us know and we'd be happy to give you a shout out. Our show today is brought to you compliments of Creative Edge, StreamYard, and BeLive Media. So whether you're watching us over on Facebook, on YouTube, on Amazon Live, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, a very, very, very hearty welcome to you. One thing that Mary and I are very passionate about is helping people level up. And so if you are an author out there and you are wanting to promote your books, one of the things that we recommend you invest in without a doubt is an external microphone. I am using the Logitech, the Samsung G-Track microphone, because if people can't see you all that clearly, they may forgive you, but if they can't hear you, they will definitely tune out. And Mary and I both use the Logitech Brio cameras. So again, that's just another recommendation to level up when you are trying to promote your books out there. Now, before we bring on our amazing guest today, I want to first introduce you to my friend and co-host, Mary Elizabeth Jackson. She's a passionate author and certified special needs and disability advocate who draws on her own experiences as a mother. She's committed to amplifying underrepresented voices and is also a podcaster, live streamer, speaker, educator, ghostwriter, and songwriter. Mary, how are you today?
I am so excited to be here today. And I love who we're going to be featuring on our show today. And I'm excited to see you. And we get to talk to some amazing people. Almost 5 years. 5 years is so long, but it feels like we just started.
Absolutely. I can't wait to talk to Liz. You know, she has got so much experience as an author. So if you, as the audience, have not yet met Elizabeth Ann Lawless, she is an accomplished and prolific author with 15 books and 48 years of publishing experience. She
Long
writes about,
time.
it's a very long time. She writes about multicultural Western history publishing, biblical living, and creativity. As the founder and host of the Wild West Diversity livestream, she shares little known stories of multicultural contribution to the settling of the American Wild West. Her two most recent children's books are African American Western Legends Yesterday and Cleo Hearn, Mr. Black Rodeo. And she's written another, she's released, we'll give you that surprise. She's released a book just this past week. Now, here's the interesting thing, and I'm going to ask her about it. She says, despite her success as an author, she considers herself as a creative first, an entrepreneur, and then an author. So let's not waste any time, and shall we welcome our amazing guest to the show?
Yes.
Hello. Well,
This
howdy from
Hi.
Texas. How exciting is that? Great intro.
Makes you feel special.
It does. It does.
Yeah. We're so glad to
welcome
have
to
you
the
here. We're
show.
just, yes.
We're so pleased to have you join us today, and we can't wait to just dive in and find out more about what it is that you do. And I'm going to jump right in. You know, you've written 15 books. You've got 48 years of publishing experience under your belt, and you write about such an unusual topic. So I'm going to ask you, you know, what is the most unusual research that you've ever had to do for a book?
Oh, wow. Well, luckily, I have the research has really come to me because the reason I write about Western history is because in the early days, I had an advertising company. That's why I consider myself more creative and an entrepreneur because I don't get up every morning and want to write, but I do get up every morning and want to be an entrepreneur, be creative, and do something related to business and helping others grow their businesses. And so, but you know, if I need to write, I can sit down and write. But I did my first book, Creative Monster. I wrote that in 1988. I sent it out to 50 publishers because back then, you know, that's the only option you had. There was traditional publishing. The internet didn't exist. And so I sent it out to 50 publishers and I got 50 rejections. I mean, 47 rejections out of 50. And, you know, man, it was like
Oh,
being stabbed in the heart, you know, and you go, well, I guess this book writing thing's not for me. So I put it away like a lot of people do. And I jumped into entrepreneurship. I started a creative services firm, you know, doing newsletters and annual reports. And so it was a little bit close to books, but not really. It was really more, you know, advertising and PR. And one of my first clients was the African American Museum in Dallas. It was the first African American museum in North America in the United States. And they had just had a big opening, but they got a lot of free stuff, but then everybody went away. But they still had programs, they still had exhibits coming in, and they needed to market and tell people and promote those things. And so the little director and I, Dr. Harry Robinson, just kind of hit it off. And so really funny that I'm the minority. You know, I was the white girl with 25 Black African American staff, you know, or 40 Black volunteers for the rodeo, for instance. And so the rodeo was their fundraiser. And it was one of those things, just sit in on a meeting one time and fill in while somebody's out of town. And so 30 years later, here I am. So I'm still doing this, but we were losing those stories. You know, we were losing those people in their 90s and their hundreds because we would do like workshops and bring these people in for the kids to meet. And, you know, they made their own toys. They made their own medicine. They made their own, you know, everything because they couldn't jump in the car and, you know, run to Walmart or CVS or Walgreens. They lived on a ranch 100 miles from town, and maybe they had a wagon or a horse or a mule to get there. But, and I said, we got to capture these stories because most minority cultures are storytellers. They weren't literate. You know, they didn't write their stories down like Europeans did. Sometimes it's because they weren't allowed to read and write, and sometimes they just didn't have the education. They didn't have the opportunity. And so they told their stories around the campfires, around the kitchen tables, and maybe if you lived in the community, you knew that person, like Aunt Riddy, who we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But, most people didn't get to hear these stories. So that's why we're capturing them. And it's really exciting. And if it wasn't fun, I wouldn't still be doing it 30 years later. And so that was the thing. I stayed, and I was basically the co-leader of the volunteer committee for the rodeo every year for about 20 years with another gentleman. And I got to meet Mr. Hearn. We're going to talk about his story. And I basically became his assistant, for lack of a better term, not officially, but unofficially, because he traveled during the week. And so he couldn't come to any of the meetings. And I set up all the interviews with newspapers and televisions and radio stations, which is how we used to do it, before the internet. And that's how I got involved in Western history. But I'm Native American. My dad was American Indian and English, and my mother was Swedish and Irish. And so we're all a mix of cultures. And regardless of what our culture is, we're influenced by other cultures, and they're all important, and all the stories are important because it builds bridges and understanding, and we art and literature and music, those are the things, and food, those are the things that break down barriers between cultures, and we need more of that, not less. I believe.
You're completely correct. Absolutely. And you've touched a little bit on, what inspired you to kind of delve into these stories. But why do you think it's important? And you've sort of touched on that a little bit, but can you expand on why you think it's important to share these stories with a wider audience? And I just love these stories that you have taken and shared with others. I think it's just, I think it's very important as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And part of it is, like you say, we've taken 16 stories of African Americans from the 1800s, because part of the problem today for kids is if they can't see somebody that looks like them, they can't make the connection. So we're trying to connect kids to their cultural heritage, and it's a collective heritage, like you say, that we all experience, that we all have a tie to. Almost everybody has an Uncle Joe or a cousin or a grandfather or an Aunt Mary or that participated somehow in moving across the American West. If you live in America, there's somebody probably in your background that participated in the Civil War, for instance, or like you say, rode across the plains in a Conestoga wagon or on a horse or something. And so connecting kids to those stories is what's important. And then, like you say, the multicultural stories and women's stories just didn't get told as much, Most of the movies, were about men. Most of the movies were, the sad thing for us is most people get their history from movies and fiction, not fact. And so in the early days of movies, they kind of took advantage of that. And a lot of the white characters who were actually Native American or African American or Hispanics were played by white characters. So we're just trying to tell the facts and let people know that there were all cultures that participated in the American Wild West, not just Anglos or what we would consider Europeans here. So
I think those are all very great reasons for wanting to share those stories and just to keep the history alive. But just to switch gears a little bit, you've just released the book that we've also showing on screen there.
Right.
Author Adventure: 5 Secrets to Success, the Art of Business of Publishing. Now, there are a lot of books available on publishing. What gap are you hoping to fill with this book?
Well, we kind of feel like, I've always felt like there were kind of 5 steps. Most people will talk to you about writing, publishing, and marketing. Okay. And then in my mind, the other 2 steps are launching, because launching your book is very important, and there are a lot of steps that can make that successful or not successful. And then distribution. Okay, marketing is telling people about your book, promoting your book. Distribution is actually selling the book. What person is actually going to buy that book? Is it a bookstore? Is it a school? Is it the military? Is it a corporation? Is it a nonprofit? Is it a church? And all of those distribution opportunities have to be spoken to in a different way. That's the bad thing. We always say there are a lot of moving parts in publishing, and publishing is my day job. This multicultural history is my secondary day job. That's kind of always been my side job. Because in the early years, like you say, advertising was my main job. And then about in 2013, 2012, I had a friend really taken advantage of drastically by Vanity Press to the tune of about $50,000 or $100,000. And I got so mad about it. I said, I got to do something about this. And so that's when I started helping people publish. So that's where this author adventure comes from. That's the name of our live stream. We're on every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. And people can go there and hear similar interviews, just like the interview we're doing today. So I really appreciate, and it's really fun for me to be on with y'all and interview and talk about my books, because usually I'm always talking about somebody else's book.
Well, we're so glad you're here too to talk about all this stuff. And history is so important. Our history, everybody around the globe, the history of wherever they live is very important. And I'm so glad that you're doing it. And, what are some of the common misconceptions that people have about publishing? And we know there's a lot of them, and how do you hope that your book's going to help them?
Well, I think the part that about the art and business of publishing, I think people think about the art a lot. They think about the writing, the editing, the layout. What is the cover going to look like? Maybe how they're going to promote it if they're savvy in social media or marketing. But like you say, they forget about the business part. I mean, writing and being an author, and certainly if you want to have an author career, a long time career in this, like I've been in it since 1992. And the reason I is because this African American museum that I worked for had a children's book festival. And they said, well, you got a book, don't you? And I said, well, I've got a manuscript. I didn't have a book. I just had the copy. But what I did have was an advertising agency, and I had a printer, and I had an artist, and I had cash flow. And self-publishing was just kind of starting. It was becoming a little bit of a thing. And I said, I can do this myself. I can figure this out, because I'm all about saying yes and figuring it out. And I learned that by being an entrepreneur and a creative. But so that's what I did. I've sold my first 100 books, said, yeehaw, this is great and wonderful. I'm going to be an author, and I've always had this dream. And here I am doing it. And I woke up about 2 days later and said, what am I going to do with these other 2,500 copies or 2,400 copies I got in the warehouse? Because back then you had to print a bunch of books. Today it's so much more exciting. It's so much easier for people to get published because of the internet and because of the platforms that are out there. And so there are multiple platforms, but I always say there are a lot of moving parts with publishing. And so people do need that roadmap. They do. You're going to need help at some point, because you can't do it all. The fact of the matter is, none of us are smart enough to know all about it. I mean, and even me, and the reason I say I've been in the business 48 years is it didn't hit me till about a year ago. I was on a call with a guy, and he said, how long you been in publishing? And I said, oh, a long time. And he said, well, you must have started really young. And he was trying to be nice, he was being complimentary of me, and because he was probably 20 years younger than I am. And I said, it was like the light came on. My parents had a Christian bookstore, and they opened that in 1972. So I was 11 when I started in the book business. So that's the other part for me. See, I really understand the retail side, the back end of the business, because my mother had a Christian bookstore for 27 years. I knew who all the publishers were in the old days. I had to catalog and put the catalogs back, because you used to have a big catalog. You'd look up the book, you'd look up the author, the publisher, and what it cost, and then you would order it for a customer. And so, I learned all of that kind of by osmosis, just by being around the business that my mother and dad had. And I always loved books. So I had access to, and that helps you too. If you have access to literature and you like to read, reading doesn't, hurt you. Reading never hurts you. It's not one of those skills or one of those activities that's going to run your life. Hopefully,
Absolutely. But you mentioned an interesting point there. You've got to have access, and if we have access, we naturally assume that everyone else has got access, but that couldn't be further from the truth. There are still millions of people out there who do not have access to a library. They don't have access to the internet to access the books. And I think sometimes we forget how privileged we are, that we have a bookshelf, that we've got a collection of books, that we can go to the library, but it's not that accessible for everybody. Before we close off, can we ask you to please read an excerpt out of both your books, The African American Western Legends, because I think that's I'm going to put you onto, that's a beautiful book. Really would love for you to read something out of that book, and then also just a snippet out of your author adventure, if that's okay.
Oh, okay. I will. I'll do that. So, so the story I want to read you today is about Henrietta Williams Foster. She was born in 1822 and she lived until 1926. And she went on cattle drives with men and owned property. This was an African-American female, in the 1800s. Women, not even white women, owned property, and not even white women went on cattle drives for the most part. I mean, there probably were some, but we just don't hear about them. We just don't know about them. And so luckily, the ancestors of Aunt Ritty have shared her story over the years. And so she was known as Aunt Ritty. She was a rare person in her time, a woman who worked cattle with men and went on many cattle drives. She had no formal education, but she was smart and she gained skill with herbal remedies as a midwife, and she taught others. She married Charles Foster and bought a place in Refugio for $25 by paying it out a quarter a week. A rarity among women she was. When she thought her neighbor was trying to steal her land, she hit him in the head with a hammer. And then she went and confessed to the sheriff because she was an upstanding woman, and she went and she said, "My gosh, I've killed Brother Johnson." And when they returned to her property, they found that the neighbor was in fact not dead. And she told the sheriff, "Arrest that man." So she was courageous. She was a midwife. She was a property owner and an African-American female in a time when African-Americans had very little access, and certainly, did not, but she did not let it stop her from buying property, from, taking on any challenge, as you can see from the story. So, those are the fun 16 stories that we have there in Western Legends. African-American Western Legends yesterday. And the reason we say yesterday is because there's a follow-up version that's today. And that'll be talking about people similar to Mr. Hearn, which is one of our other books. And I know we don't have time to get to everything, but yeah, so we've got that. And then hopefully I should have a book over here.
I'm glad you explained. I'm glad you explained why you called it yesterday, because I was going to ask you about that. What's with the yesterday part?
Yeah. So we actually have a middle school reader that has all the stories, that has the yesterday and today in it. It's called Western Legends, Yesterday and Today, African Americans from 1798 to 2009. Because our goal was to do multiple stories, do one on African Americans, one on Hispanics, one on women. And originally I had planned to do that as a combined story, but I found I had like 40 or 50 African American stories, 3 women's stories, 2 Native American, and 2 or 3 Hispanic. And so we ended up going with the African American just because we had all those stories. So anyway, I think what I'll read from here is this is our author adventure. And so the reason we call it 5 Secrets to Success, the Art and Business, is because we want people to understand it is a business too. There is going to be some investment. You want to be careful with people. You want to check people out, especially if somebody calls you and wants to publish for you or wants to do something for you. Always be careful about that, because there are a lot of people that take advantage of people. We're a partner publisher, if that makes sense. We help people. We do certain pieces of the project and share costs, but people have access to our network. So they have access to our knowledge, to our distribution, to the things that we already have in place. So let's see, what can I read here about? I think I'll read a little bit about conquering fears, if that's okay. So people have dreams and fears. If you have a dream of writing or a dream of becoming a best-selling author, don't let anyone steal your dreams. Not loved ones, such as family, not friends, not neighbors, not coworkers, not even your own subconscious mind. Don't fall prey to the negative comments or thoughts that can slow you down, such as, who are you to think that you can teach somebody something? You're too old, you're too young, it's too risky, don't do it. It costs too much, you don't know enough, you're a bestseller, ha ha ha. Don't allow any of those people to steal your dreams. So that was kind of the thing for me. I always wanted to write. My first, I got rejected 47 times. But as life will happen, it came back around. It was 5 years later. Some people write for 10 years or 12 years or 20 years, before they actually get published. But if you want to publish, there is a way. And our book gives you like 5 ways to write. The ways we find that most people write, they either journal. There may be who, what, when, where, and how, which is more of a journalistic or a newspaper style. That's what I do because I was a journalism major. Sometimes that you can interview somebody else. If you think you don't have enough knowledge about a subject, you can go and interview other people, and then that can become your chapters. I have a friend that likes to just go away for the weekend and take all of her materials and take all her research and take all her books and stuff. And then she just writes and writes and writes and writes and writes and writes, for 2 or 3 days. And then you always come back and edit. So you write. We'll tell you in this book, write, edit. Don't edit your own stuff because I don't edit my stuff. Because you read it right, don't you, Mary Elizabeth? I mean, you know what it's supposed to say. And so somebody else reads it and they go, I don't think you meant to say that. You said so. Is that what you meant? And I go, no, I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say this. But anyway, it's publishing and being an author is a fabulous journey. It is a process. And so we would say, don't get frustrated. Don't get overwhelmed. Just take it one step at a time. There's nothing you can't learn today, on the internet yourself. There's nothing you can't do yourself. And it really comes down to 2 things, either control, creative control, which I always wanted to have, as you can obviously tell pretty easily, or money. If you've got the money to invest and you want to have creative control, then you'll find a way to do it yourself. If you don't have that, you can still go the traditional way. There are traditional publishers, there are regional publishers, and it's really interesting, the up and down flow. Everybody said, paperbacks, hardbacks, they're all going away. I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening at all. It's really interesting that the knowledge that kids today, they want the children's books to hold in their hand. They want it online. What we find is if people like the book, they buy an ebook copy and they buy a paperback copy, because at some point the kids are in the car, they're at Susie's, dance recital, they're at Bobby's soccer game, and the other kids are sitting there waiting, while the other child, because most people have more than one child, a lot of people have 2 or 3 kids, and so they got to entertain them in the meantime. And so we find that both is going on. And obviously audiobooks and animation, those are going to be the new big things, the key things going forward. But that still is a more expensive process. You know, the cost is coming down considerably compared to 5 or 10 years ago. And the reason we wrote this book is because I had a previous book, but it didn't have any of the social media, you know. I mean, there are a lot of things that, like this live stream that we're doing right now, that didn't exist 5 years ago. I mean, you could do it, but you had to have a lot of money. I mean, it existed, but it cost you hundreds of that, you know, thousands of dollars. Whereas today, you know, anybody can get on and have a show or talk about a subject matter that's important to them, that's close to their heart. And so I appreciate you ladies so much for doing this and giving authors an opportunity, because that is the hardest thing. You know, people wake up and they've written their book, they've spent all this time, and then they go, oh, you mean I got to publish? Oh, you mean I got to market this book? Oh, you mean people aren't going to just come and buy it when I put it on Amazon? Well, no, not if they don't know about it. So, you know, you've got to find those opportunities like y'all putting, you know, being on a podcast, being on a live stream, going out to events. I mean, you know, I wish there was one thing that I could say work for everybody. And the only thing that I know that works for everybody when you're selling books is selling yourself personally, one-on-one. Because when you talk to people and they meet you, they'll buy your book. You know, they'll make that connection. And I mean, we've been at events, and like the library conference last week in Texas, 4,000 or 5,000 librarians. They will walk by, and when you say, oh, this is author Beth Hernandez, she wrote this book about, they will stop and turn around and come back to the table because they want to meet the author, any author, because most of them want to write themselves. They just haven't taken the time or the energy or invested. They're afraid to invest in themselves. And so that's what we encourage people to do. If you've got that dream, go after it. You know, find a way. There's somebody that's going to help you. Authors are fabulous people. Bridget's fabulous, but you know, Brichetti's fabulous. Mary Elizabeth's fabulous. You know, you can follow them on social media. You can listen to these shows and get all kinds of, you know, free information from people. And so it's a great life. It's a great journey. You know, I wouldn't still be in it if it wasn't fun and exciting. And, you know, every day is different, but it's a process, you know, and you got to just,
yeah,
you got to just
really
take the journey.
Really is a great journey. Liz, thank you so much. You were an awesome guest. Thank you to our amazing audience around the globe for joining us today. And we'll see you back next week on another episode of the Writers' Corner Live Show. Take care, everyone. Bye for now. Thank you for joining us on the Writers' Corner Live Show. 30 minutes of insightful author conversations with some of the biggest names in the industry, including award-winning authors and international indie sensations. Join us on the next episode of the Writers' Corner Live Show.